Welcome to 1 of 200. We're here for the off season, covering a range of different things happening in politics, media, civil society. I'm joined by two fantastic guests. It is a reunion tour with my friends Tim and Cassie to talk about the New Zealand film industry and the New Zealand creative industries and just the kind of social, financial, organizing deficit in those spaces, and maybe some of the things that creators are struggling with at the moment, some of the challenges that they face, but also some of the opportunities that might be out there or might be easily fixed if one of the political parties was to pick up some policies and actually try and solve some of these issues for just the immense talent in Aotearoa. So we'll get straight into it. First of all, let's start with some intros. Cassie, do you want to let people know where you come from, what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm Cathasaigh Ó Fiannachta. Dear Yves, hello everybody. I am from film, so my background's screenwriting, and then transitioning into producing, directing, but sort of in more recent years, focusing on talent development and talent opportunities for people in the local landscape. We have too much talent and not enough pathways, and that's a pretty great problem to have, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, that's me. That's my whole vibe. Throwing to Tim.
I guess I'm a tattoo artist and just all around, I guess like I don't know, I've had my fingers in different creative industries all over the years, including a stint in film working in props and special effects and studied production design and all that kind of stuff back in the day. And kind of had an experience of what it was like working in New Zealand's film industry during what was considered a boom at the time, but for a lot of reasons was like actually a really terrible time to work in the industry. Someone was making the money, it wasn't us. But yeah, that's my relevant credentials anyway. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Kyle, yeah.
I'm just some guy.
Yeah.
Now, for the old 1 of 200 heads, you may have even seen our previous live stream, right?
Yeah. We used to do, me and Kyle used to do fortnightly kind of media entertainment stream, where we would often get on New Zealand creatives to come and talk about what they've been up to, what they've been enjoying, all that kind of stuff. It was a little bit more, I guess, like entertainment focused than the 1 of 200 stuff generally is. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, we had a lot of cool people on.
Like I said, there's a lot of talent.
I feel like there's a lot of people that we spoke to just before they went off to do something like really cool. Like, like all these people that we talked to at the time have all carried on to do really cool stuff. Like, like making comic books, poetry books, all this kind of stuff, like music, everything. Yeah, it was a cool period. And I thought we had some really cool conversations with some interesting people.
Cassie, did we have you on the live stream, or did we have you on the live stream and an episode?
I think maybe both.
I don't remember. Yeah.
We definitely did the stream. I think maybe was there an episode as well? I feel like we did the stream because we were talking about the film industry at the time, and we were talking about the changes in the industry, about who was getting funding, but in a more broader international thing. I think it was who was it? De Niro maybe had just come out and said something about how he had commented on how all the cinemas were just full of like Marvel movies, and it was like, like you could go and see like Spider-Man 12 for like the 5th month running or something like that, but it was really difficult to get like an independent film in cinemas.
Spider-Man 12 out next week. Go and see it in cinemas.
Yeah. The stream brought to you. I remember talking about that, but I can't remember what else we were.
Well, let's not get down to in
this
the
was
weeds.
like literally years. This was years ago.
This was years and years ago.
Yeah, and as I was saying to Kyle, that's actually how I met you, Tim. So, like, for all the listeners,
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So, like,
years ago. That's right.
Yeah, and like we've just ended up having the coolest friendship. Like you've tattooed me since then. So, no,
we've hung
we'll
out
be
so
here
much,
today,
yeah.
brother, without one of 200.
That's crazy. I actually, yeah, I completely forgot. That was the first time we spoke. But that's yeah, and I feel like a lot of the people that we had on stream, a lot of them were people that one of like me or Kyle was friends with in some way beforehand, but then I feel like putting them on the stream, we kind of, like became like it kind of solidified a lot of friendships. And even we've had there were streams that we'd had multiple people on in different creative fields that then became friends. And it was really fun to do.
A good space. It's so it has come some distance since then. And Cassie, I wanted to kind of pass it to you here to maybe try and give us, as much as you can, a snapshot of what has changed in the last few years and where you think the industry is at now. I guess we can, if we really wanted to, and we'll probably talk about it a little more detail later in the episode. Tim, you alluded to working in the industry previously, and I think that was around the time just before and just after the Hobbit law came into
Yeah.
force. And things have just kind of degraded since then. But alongside that, I think some other kind of funding opportunities around crowdfunding and etc. have also, what do you say, like solidified. Cassie, where are you finding the industry at the moment? And how have your fortunes been trying to work and make films?
It's a really interesting one because there's a bunch of different industries, and they're not all participating in the same sort of in the same, even sometimes like ecosystem. So from sort of where I work professionally, in the local industry, especially in the local indie space, that is with people making their first feature films or moving people from short film to feature film, doing a lot of mentorship in that space. And that exists in a different kind of realm than the international co-production space, which would be movies that are around sort of between 4 to 7 million, and they're sort of made in collaboration with two different film organizations, so the Film Commission using an official treaty. And then there's like good old-fashioned Hollywood, which is the studio system, and that kind of operates in its own sort of echelon as well. So like take, for example, right now, everyone is descending upon Cannes. And that is the Film Commission will be there not only to sort of broker deals for New Zealand as a place to come and make your movies, but also to try and like promote New Zealand filmmakers. And so there are, I've got an independent film that's going to that market with one, with a distributor, as well as sort of scripted projects going with other producers at a different part of that market to look at that co-production route. So it's a really important time for sort of the independent industry. So it's like non-Hollywood industry. But everybody's really uncertain about what it means because you used to be able to go to a market and you used to be able to do deals. Now, that has not been for some time, in the entire time that I've been an adult living and working in the industry, it has not been hot tubs and, signing deals. But you did used to be able to go to a market and leave with something in hand. Whereas now the energy is you go to markets to meet people with the idea of maybe doing some deals and maybe connecting in that way. Because there's a lot of uncertainty sort of off the back of the strikes that were happening in the US and then followed by Trump's tariffs in the US. That's kind of put a little bit of uncertainty in the studio system about how does Hollywood get stuff made. And, from having a couple of projects going around the town and having my ear to the ground and that things are pretty, in some ways, they're still business as usual. There is still organizations that are making money. They have the ability to attach to projects, get them through, get them moving. But that is way less money than it used to be. And the moving parts seems to be shrinking. Back in the day, before you got to a tastemaker, you had to get past an agent and a manager and this and that and a development team. And there's just no money to keep those people employed anymore. So, even on the Hollywood system, you're kind of seeing it shrink down to fewer people in that space. So, yeah, everyone's facing very similar issues, which is how do I draw down the funding to make my project and how do I sell my project and actually maybe make some money back for it? And these different levels will all have a different way of approaching that based on kind of, what it is they're making. Obviously project that you make for under $100,000 has got a really, really different life cycle than an official Canadian New Zealand co-production made for, like 8 million, New Zealand has a really different pathway. But we're all kind of coming up against the same thing, which is nobody's making any money. And part of that is we are building a new relationship with audiences, as streaming changes that landscape, as COVID, really massively changed that landscape. No one's really sure how to get people back into the movies. And I think a lot of distributors or people in that sales space why would they spend the money on the minimum guarantees and on the promotion when they can just fling it off to a streamer and make a little bit of money and move on? So I think part of what we're also seeing is just kind of a laziness in the distribution and sales space. To go back to the co-production model for a second, to draw down whether or not it's co-production or whether or not it's a New Zealand production and that funding is coming from a government organization, in order for that money, in order for the soft money to become real money that you can spend, often it's conditional that you have a distributor attached. So this is, the biggest difference between last time we talked and now is that distributors can take the piss. It is gone from going, hey, having a distributor on your project is showing us that you have a professional relationship and a pathway to sales. And now distributors going, well, I can give you a $1 minimum guarantee because I know that you
No.
can't get that funding without me. Yep.
Oh, wow.
And these are projects with stars. These are projects with multi-million-dollar budgets, and they are being given $1 minimum guarantees from companies that will go on to do no promotion, no nothing. They just want to take it to market. They just want to flick it off to a streamer. And part of that, again, is, you have a good thing and you live long enough to become the villain, right? Great idea. Great idea. Let's make sure that people who are making films have market attachments and pathways to market before we fund so that they can get to market. Awesome. Cannibalize that a little bit down the track. And you've got distributors going, okay, well, you need me. Otherwise, you're not going to get your funding.
Yeah.
And now I don't have to do anything for this movie. I don't have to give you a proper minimum guarantee anymore. So I don't have to put any money on the line, which means I don't have to take any risks in the sales or the promotion. I don't have to put any money into the sales or the promotion of it. And I know that you can't go anywhere else. So here we go, here we are. And this is something that is impacting everybody from micro budget, tiny films, all the way up to major budget films, all the way up to conversations that I'm having with people in the studio system who are going, yeah, they're getting a similar thing sort of from American distributors who are like, oh, no, there's no money in cinema, so we'll just fling it off to the streamers. But then you're also seeing independent distribution strategies from producers where 1,000 cinemas are really happy to play their movie and they're seeing really good audience turnover, So anyway, that's my long little info dump about the stratas of the industry and the distribution issues that we're facing, the money-making element of it. Can we make good shit? Absolutely. Do we know how to make top quality films? Absolutely. Do we know how to sell those effectively so that we can continue to sustainably make more films?
I mean, there's a very clear structural issue there immediately, right, with the distribution model. But is it also being used as a gatekeeping effect as well? Or is it purely market driven?
It's a combination of things, because all of the same things are still at play, right? All the nepotism things are still at play, all of the how it all comes together, what is the package? And, everybody's making a calculated risk to keep their business afloat, right? So this is not me, that there are some fantastic distributors out there working right now, and they're working with not particularly good budgets and not particularly good resources, and they're making some really cool stuff happen. That is not all of them. And I think one of the difficult things as well is as the way people make money off this product shifts, we are seeing everybody try to squeeze the last dregs of money out of the last models. And, we're all, no one listening can see, but we're all nodding along, knowing that that's where exploitation starts. It is once people start really getting down to who can I squeeze the last drops out of this business model is when it's like, great, maybe we should start working on a new business model.
Yeah. And I guess alongside all of this as well, in terms of the delivery aspect, we've gone through the whole streaming, the uptick of streamers, so like Netflix, et ceteras, to stuff like the big social media platforms having stuff put out on them, and just people just watching clips and not being able to manage with long form as much, so that you end up with this idea of your second screen viewing, which I think in some cases is just third screen viewing at this stage as well. And so which drives like what people are willing to take a risk on or even to distribute in the first place. And it's just this huge downstream impact, I guess, creation on the creative process
Mm.
as much as it is on the market process, which I find not good.
Yeah, like third act problems are first act problems is something that we say in screenwriting all the time, and it's similar for development and distribution, right? Sales issues start in development. Sales issues start in finance, and an effective and sustainable business model is one that has that kind of in a pipeline. Like in order for you to be able to look at a whole system and really effectively and ethically create a product, you actually kind of need to have the whole process. And because film is like, we're going to do this bit, and then we're going to do this bit, and then we're going to do this bit. And, I mean, full disclosure, my background is as a screenwriter, and we are the first people to get gouged. It's like you're trying to build a sustainable industry, and you're building it off the fact that you assume that screenwriters should work unpaid for years,
Mm.
and then when you come into a final negotiation about it, everybody is trying to lowball that person, and they're
Yeah.
saying that that's good for business. And so, as much as I hate being that person who is like, at first they came for the screenwriters, and no one did anything, and now they're coming for crew, and we're really starting to see it happen. That's just the reality. We have been, because New Zealand has not, a lot of the boom parts of the New Zealand industry are tied to us doing poorly unionized labor for international productions. And one of the most offensive phrases that was used a lot, and it's been used quite recently, is people view New Zealanders as Mexicans with cell phones.
Yeah, I
That was,
literally remember hearing that on set, and I posted about it on Twitter a while back. And another dude was like, "Oh yeah, like they used to say this to us all the time as well." It's like,
yep.
I wonder what the origin of that is. Like, is that something they fucking like? It was like a boardroom in Hollywood somewhere, and they're like, "Hey guys, I figured it all out. I know how we're gonna make money super fucking cheap. We're gonna make movies super cheap."
Yeah,
Because yeah, it was like
100%.
yeah. I like it was such a common sentiment, It was it was crazy. Yeah.
Well,
That's
and
actually
a lot of
fascinating that
that,
you brought it up as well.
yeah, well, it's when people think about workers' rights, and there's a lot of really great movement happening in that space, sort of with collective action and trying to see better, and stronger unions. And so my hat off to everybody doing that mahi, because that is all volunteer work.
Mm.
So much of Screen Union work is volunteer work. The Writers Guild of New Zealand is not the WGA. It does not have a huge amount of money. And so anything that is ever earned is coming off the back of a huge amount of work of human beings that are pushing for that. So, there are some incredible people out there really fighting very hard to see progress. And they are fighting against a couple of assumed beliefs that I think give people a very skewed perspective of things. Like, if we start having minimum pay rates that New Zealand producers won't be able to afford to pay anybody. Like that's one that I've heard bandied around a lot. If we start having basic pay rates, then what about the little guys? And it's like, great, put a sweat equity model in place. Put something in place where people will still see a return. There's ways of negotiating that. Let's just make sure people are being paid fairly. I don't know. I think there's also you're right in the kind of precedent that the Hobbit Law established about how we as a nation prepared to dance that dance. And, as much as it kept work coming in the short term, it kept work coming in the short term off the back of the fact that our workers had no rights,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the reality of that is it becomes a race to the bottom because there's always going to be another country that is going to be prepared to as we push to have higher standards for our workers, there's going to be another country who's like, well, we'll take that work. We're happy to exploit our
Mm.
laborers. Bring your work over here.
Or
Yeah.
we can give you more of a tax break, right? Because we've got more money.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I think happened to a couple of shows that were being filmed in New Zealand within the last 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
where they took the second season overseas, and just because they could, just
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah. It
this
absolutely
is
happened.
cheaper.
Yeah. It's
Well, that's
yeah.
it was so interesting to see the situation with Rings of Power
That's the
because
one
they got everything they needed, though. They got the Kiwi brand. they got that Middle Earth bling on it, and
Yeah.
then they left. Because
Yeah.
why do they
Yeah.
need to still be here if they've got to pay more, if they can get it done cheaper in the UK, if they can get it done cheaper somewhere else? So,
Yeah.
a business model that was working at a time where there weren't as many doors to knock on. There weren't as many options back in the day, so we could capture that work because we were an English-speaking territory that did top quality work and we were prepared to work our people into the ground. You know, there's a lot of the stories that you hear about why people bring it, I remember it was the film commission was kind of starting to pull together a strategy. I think there'd been a CEO changeover. And so there's like, must have been 150, nearly 200 members of the screen industry. And we're all doing those tedious things of sitting at tables and talking about all our ideas and what are we going to do? And how are we going to attract more work? And the number of people who are like, we're going to do it like we always did. We're going to outwork everybody and we're going to be cheaper than everybody. And it's
Yeah.
a thing.
It's going to be a race to the bottom.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh no, guys, that time is done. That's gone and it's not coming back. And the only way that it's coming back is if we gouge our workers' rates to the point that it
Yeah.
becomes
Have you
appealing.
heard of prison labor?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
Because we're building
Well,
a
I
mega
hear
Probably
prison
a
up
great
here.
way to make movies. Yeah.
like, I don't know, it's like, is it an offshoot in the screen industry's version of like screen feudalism, entertainment feudalism? Like, oh, we are but mere entertainment serfs.
Yeah.
We work for our entertainment overlords.
We also had the New Zealand screen production rebate as well, which I think is amazing for domestic productions. I think it's something about 40% of it's like a tax rebate scheme or whatever like that. But it's like it can be like 20 to 25% for international productions. So just by doing the production in New Zealand, they can claim that amount back, and it is uncapped. So, like James Cameron, et cetera, whatever, are like getting a lot of money back just by doing that production in New Zealand. And as I'm aware of numerous cases at the serious fraud office because of like insane scams to do, particularly with the NZSPR. Like there's one guy who he's like, just like millions and millions for like a dozen different productions that never quite happened. They're always falling through at the last minute and all this kind of stuff, which is, like this is money that could be going to, these domestic productions and things like that. But yeah,
the screen production rebate is a really interesting, like, as you say, like gift and curse, right? Because on one hand, it is sort of depending on which boxes that you're ticking, you can get up to 40%. And it's 40% on the boots on the ground spend. So that money has to have been spent in New Zealand for them to then unlock the rebate. And so in the last few months, it's certainly at the beginning of this year, the Film Commission announced that they'd be lowering the production budget threshold for that. So it came down from 15 million to 4 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which in some ways is absolutely bloody amazing because nothing internationally is getting made at a $15 million mark. So all of these projects that were in that sort of $4 to $5 to $6 million were not able to access the rebate. Therefore, the productions weren't able to come here. So I think we are going to see an increase in those sort of international independent productions being able to come here. But it does raise those questions, which is that threshold was set at that limit for a reason. That was to ensure that, these resources these resources ended up fostering both an international service industry and a national entertainment industry. And right now, we've done a really good job of being an international service industry. But we've not really invested a huge amount of that success into our above the line talent. So our writers, our directors, our producers. So, take a look at the strikes. The pipeline of work coming into, the Wellington machine that was churning out Marvel movies, as soon as that started grinding to halt, there was nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, but it's crazy that there was nothing. You guys have the money to invest in development. You guys have the money to put so many productions, like screenwriting is the cheapest part of the pipeline.
Mm.
Like flick 25K to a writing team and they could write you something real cool, but you're
Yeah,
telling
yeah.
me that you don't have a single thing that you can put through your factory?
Well, we need to
Like,
give that all
ugh.
to Sir Richard and Sir Peter.
Yeah, yeah.
Ugh.
And this
I
is the
do
thing, right?
remember
We
oh
got rid of all the workers' rights. They weren't able to organize.
yeah,
It all centralized. It all like everything flowed uphill.
yeah.
And these two guys in particular created their little fiefdoms.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be
Alongside, Julie Christie and others in that kind of maybe reality
Yeah.
TV space and some marketing areas, some distributors maybe as well. I don't know as much about those, but it meant that money flowed uphill. People were exploited and
Yeah.
burnt out. This is still happening at Weta. Like this is how
Yeah.
Yeah,
Weta
yeah.
operates: is they get in
Yeah.
interns or like graduates,
Yeah.
they work them to the bone, and they kick them out with no
Yeah.
opportunities.
And
Yeah.
there's nowhere to graduate to, like you don't
Yeah.
go anywhere after that.
Because they haven't built
Yeah.
an infrastructure around it. There
Well,
isn't like
yeah.
a
Yeah.
Weta Advanced, right? Even there isn't
Well,
even like
yeah.
a
So
further expansion of their own fiefdom.
yeah, back when I was working in props and special effects and everything like that, it was they were talking about a lot of this stuff, saying that all of these foreign productions were going to help us build the infrastructure here and upskill everyone, and it meant that we would be doing contracts for these international productions that would help us develop our workshop, and like this would help us, like we could get a bigger space, we could take on bigger projects, we could do all this kind of stuff. But because you were saying there that we were existing as a service industry, it's like there were these bigger projects that we were going to work on or whatever, they just were never a thing that happened. We just existed as kind of this like organ of the like an organ of Hollywood as opposed to a separate film industry ourselves. And that's it's what happened in Australia as well, where it's like they used to have a really thriving film production scene, and it's just kind of done the same thing where now they just exist to create films for other people internationally, films and advertising as well. We were doing a lot of TV ads and things like that as well, which I don't know what the scene like that is for like anymore, because it kind of seems like now that people aren't so much into like TV, it seems like the advertising market has changed a lot. But yeah, speaking of Sir Richard, this is another thing that I spoke about on Twitter a little while back. He has this, I don't know if he still has this stance, but at the time, the words that he used specifically was that he refused to prostitute his workers to the advertising market. So he believed that his business, like whether they would only work on big productions, like proper movies, things like this. They wouldn't do ads, which is at the time was like probably like 60 to 70% of what we were doing was, like ads for companies from like Japan and things who would just want like a short ad and they would need some props or special effects or whatever. So we were having, and this was common amongst the other production companies in Auckland, around West Auckland, were hiring. Actually, maybe we should just edit this part. I should say, instead of saying we were doing this, say, so Auckland-based companies were hiring Weta employees that were under contract to work for nobody else aside from Weta, but because they were just like sitting on their hands, not working, because if there was no movie, there was no money. They would come up to Auckland and work cash under the table for other companies as just cash laborers, because otherwise they weren't able to pay their rent or anything like that. It's like when there's no big international productions or anything like that, there was absolutely nothing coming through the door for these workers to pay their bills or anything. And at the time they weren't able to organize it.
Yeah, they're all on contract, right?
Yeah,
So much of these were on
exactly.
like contract per film.
And like the Hobbit law is like specifically about being like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what the relationship is, they are never protected by basic employees' rights or anything like that. So so it was crazy. And this is like, this is years and years ago now, and there was just nothing happening if it wasn't something big. There was no, like, back in the day it would be like oh man, if there's, nothing big going on, maybe, the workshop might do pretty competitive rates to work for like local productions or something like that, just like something like that to fill the time and get people working and have some money coming in. But at that time, it was just, it was
Well,
that or nothing.
one of the things that I've seen a lot of these companies, and whether or not they're at the scale of Weta Digi or whether or not they're some of the smaller companies like Floating Rock, I've seen a lot of these visual effects animation studios
Mm.
try and dip their toe into development and fail miserably. And every time it's because they never hire writers.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
time it is because, you'll see some business call go out, you'll see something go out, and at no point in time does it ever have someone who's experienced in development getting paid money to
Mm.
engage and work with writers to create things that can be put into production in these
Yeah,
studios,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so some of it is just, poor management, like poor management. There is a really, really big difference. And this is not to say that people who are doing the visual world building do not have storytelling skills.
Mm.
But if you've never written a screenplay, if you've never put together the materials to pitch a screenplay, if you've never completed that level of professional work, what are you doing leading the development department? Like if you have no narrative development experience, what are you doing leading a development team? And so I think there's also just been an element of people thinking that the design phase of of this process that anybody can do because it just looks like typing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anybody with a computer can sit down and write a screenplay that could get financed and
I'll
make
just
And
ask
positive
everyone's
sales.
got an
ChatGPT.
idea as well. Everyone
Yeah.
everyone has an idea. Everyone's like, oh man, I just like I've got a movie in my head and like it'll be awesome. Everyone will love it. And it's like, I mean, you might have like an idea for something, but you gotta, like there's a whole art to actually turning that into something that other people can understand or relate to or whatever.
Also,
It's
very different things for very, very different pathways, right? Like when you're
yeah.
developing something to be a low budget film, that's a very specific kind of writing because you're
Yeah,
writing
yeah.
to resources, you're writing to what can I make for nothing?
Mm,
Versus, if you're writing a project that is designed for a co-production, you're going, great, I need to have something that can be set either in one of these locations. It needs to have cast coming from both. It needs to be able to appeal to these things. It needs to exist in these marketplaces.
yeah.
And so, one of the downsides of this industry being really young is that our writer development pathways are really immature. And it's one of the reasons that I do donate as much time as I do is to go, hey, we're not going to be able to upskill writers to an international standard if we don't have international standard writers out there
Mm,
actually getting stuck into it. But a huge part of it is we try and have writers cordoned off and go, oh, you sweet little babies, just go be creative. And you don't bother your pretty little heads with how much
mm,
things cost or what needs to be done. Just go be creative. And the reality is you can't produce that film.
yeah.
Writers, as part of their training, need to know that we are participating in a very expensive,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
very
absolutely.
collaborative process. And, that's not to say that you can't have more experimental processes. So,
Mm,
like my film Hang Time, which is currently on TVNZ Plus, is a semi-scripted project that was developed up between me and the cast. Some of it was scripted, some of it was improv. The reason that went really smoothly is a huge number of the cast were also writers, though. So,
mm.
when you've got people who were skilled in those spaces, we were able to do a lot of problem solving. And then Pop, which you guys have seen. Thank you for going to the
Yes,
movies
yeah.
and terrified to see it. But that was a project that was not fully scripted. And part of that was a decision to kind of support the director and the director's strengths. Tim
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton is a real maximalist visual storyteller. And so the creative challenge for me as a producer who's from writing was to kind of catch the pieces and kind of help it all come together. And so that, I definitely don't want listeners to think that sitting and writing a screenplay is the only way to do things. But the conscious choice to not go down traditional development paths was made with a lot of experience as a writer and as a producer, but also knowing where this film was going to go,
Mm.
right? This is a film director's first feature, and the victory conditions for that film be that we introduce him to the town, we show everybody what he can do, wanted to really give him an opportunity as well to learn. I think, on feature films, being able to go, hey, how do I work with actors over a longer storytelling period? How do I tell a story over 90 minutes and not have millions of dollars worth of pressure?
Because if I'm correct on this, that the director had only really done shorts up
Yeah,
until.
so one of the main reasons that I peer pressured Tim into making pop in the first place was he had done a lot of shorts and he was very successful in that space. So separate to the fact that he had like dominated for several years in the 48-hour competition space, he had also had a short film Zero, which had won a TikTok award at Cannes and had played a huge number of festivals. So he had very much been tipped to be somebody that people had their eye on. He's a very talented guy. And the whole project kind of started. I got a phone call from Trenton Colbert, who plays the lead character, Mike, because he had been out shooting with Tim, and Tim had kind of shared the fact that he was getting a bit of pressure to kind of make a on the rails short film, like make something a bit more prestige with a little bit more budget to just like demonstrate to people that he could make something safe. And I, of course, was like, not on my watch. And a big part of it was sitting him down and going, one, I think you're ready for features. Like you're ready to take that next step career-wise so that you can start working on longer format stuff. But I had been very lucky in my journey to have had received some great advice about, again, what you need to do is kick the door down and introduce yourself as yourself and make something really out the gate. And so the idea that this really unique voice, his pathway was to sing in somebody else's voice, just like did not sit with me at all. I was like, no, success for you lies in going out there and being you. And so part of that was really going, okay, how do you support a really original voice to tip over? The victory conditions for the film are not that we make millions of dollars. It's we want some money coming back to everybody that put their time and effort into it. We want to be able to get it in front of as many people as possible. But the real victory conditions for this film was to prove that Tim Hamilton could make a feature film and to prove that Trent Colbert was a leading man material, that he was able to carry a performance through the film. And even down to sort of the crew that were working on it, just giving people a chance to get their first feature film credit, that allows them to just put their hand up for higher paid, longer work. And so, yeah, sort of because the victory conditions for it and the budget for it are way smaller, you've got a lot more freedom to kind of go, okay, we've got a lot more freedom to make the movie that is the most Tim Hamilton movie possible. But it also means that like this movie's debt free. And so I don't have to take deals that don't align with our values. I don't have to take deals that don't align with the material. We're really in a place where we're trying to build our relationship with audiences, in part because, you want to be able to bring your next film and say, hey, did you love pop here? Enjoy this one. But I think another big part of it is, in New Zealand, we've kind of lost that intermediate step. Like we used to have C4, right? And C4 was where all of the emerging directors kind of got to sink their teeth into making music videos.
Yeah.
Working with something with a little bit of budget, and they'd kind of be able to take that step from there up. But like right now, we've got people making heaps of shorts, and we've got people who are getting funded at the $1 million plus level.
I was going to say, there's like this whole strata that just like disappeared.
Yeah.
Just like the disappearance of music television in general has like just completely changed things. And it's like it's such a loss, like aside from all the fun things about, like getting home after school and watching fucking C4 for hours with your friends or whatever. But just like when you think about how many amazing directors came through just shooting, 3-minute music videos for bands and kind of getting to do something a little bit wild or, a little bit different.
Yeah, and build an audience. It's like, we were aware who was making stuff because, and like Kyle, you and I were at uni together, right? And you're sitting and C4's on in the background, and some of it is like, local acts where you are kind of, seeing new people's work, seeing new actors' work, seeing really interesting stuff come up. And so I think, when we think about how do we replace those intermediate steps with things, and, the industry is as such now that it's not enough to have a good music video and it's not enough to just have a good short film. You need a feature, and I think that's difficult for a lot of people to kind of take on board because for the last, what, 30 years, we've been saying, hey, make a really great short film and get it into an A-list festival, and then all the gates will open for you. And, maybe if you're a Nepo baby, um, and the doors were always going to open for you, but to get in the running, to be taken seriously, you need a feature now. And so the challenge kind of becomes for people who are, they've made shorts, but they're not at that point that they could, unlock $1 million plus budget. It's like, great, how do you make something that's really cool for as little money as
Yeah.
possible and never have people think too much about how little money you had? It's one of those things. Like, there's a really big difference between a film that you go, that was really scrappy, that was really cool, I loved its
Mm,
lo-fi vibe, and a movie where you were like, wow, they had one dude's apartment and one bad camera for that
yeah,
film.
yeah. I do kind of love those like I feel like some of my favorite films and even this like, creative projects in general are ones that have been made under a limitation
Yeah.
and seeing how people engage with those limitations and actually like, like I think having to think harder about how you're going to shoot something is such a creative challenge. Like I always think about the way that Steven Spielberg's movies have changed over time now that he can put anything on screen that he wants. So you get like a movie like Ready Player One where he can just CGI absolutely anything, as many like a million characters on screen all doing this kind of stuff, and it has like absolutely no visual impact. And then you think about like say Jurassic Park when he has to show the size of a Tyrannosaurus, but they don't have an entire Tyrannosaurus to show. So they just have to figure out, like, oh, so we can just show the legs, or like we have to show that it's shaking the ground. Like, how do we do that without actually building a shaking stage? Like, oh, we show like the ripples in a cup of water, or we show an angle where you just see the insides of its legs from by the characters' heads. Like these kind of things, I think have always forced people to consider the shots that they're making and be like, oh, okay, there's a limited amount of ways we can do this, which is going to be really good, instead of just being like, oh, fuck it, we can just do whatever. Let's just do the first thing that comes to mind, how we can put this on screen or whatever. Um, and I feel
Yeah,
like,
100%.
yeah, yeah.
It's I remember having a conversation with uh, Vicky Jackwitz, who used to be at Park Road Post, and she was there from the transition from film into digital. And she's
Mm,
like, this illusion that people have that it is cheaper is it's just that, it's an illusion. On film, people thought about it because they had to think about it. Now that everything could be shot digitally, everybody shoots everything. Now it all needs to be stored. It all needs to be sorted. It all needs, there's all of these processes that still has to happen to digital footage. And because we've got this mindset change that it is no longer, we've only got so much film and it's really expensive to do this. So let's get it right.
Yeah.
Now it's like, all right, let's do it again in the wide. Let's do this.
Or like,
Let's
let's
take it
fix it
again
in
from over
post,
here.
which is just such a wild way to think about something.
yeah, this is kind of tangential, but one interesting thing was one of the films that I worked on was the Bridge to Terabithia, which was Gabor Ksupo's first live action film. He's the guy that did Rugrats back in the day, like he did like a bunch of animated stuff. And then so this is his first actual, like real life feature production. And he was like showing up on set every day and being like, okay, cool. So we're going to get an angle coming down from here. And then it's like, okay, well, so you would have had to let us know about that like 2 weeks ago so that we could, like, the riggers could come in and build this and do this kind of stuff. And then, and it was just this thing that kept coming up where it was like, okay, well, like we have to build the sets. We have to build the sets. We have to build the props. And on the budget that we were on, sometimes we were building props that only had one side to them. It's like the camera can't see the other side of this prop. And this was all budget related. This is all, yeah, like what you're saying about you have to think about these things when you're writing, because and it's like you have to think about these things when you're also, like storyboarding or composing, coming up with the ideas with the shots, because then we have to go and actually do the work to put these together, and we're trying to save money as well, and it's, there's like different layers to all of this.
Yeah, I think what we're about to see is an explosion of innovation, a period of time in cinema history that I think not just within New Zealand, but within sort of globally, we're seeing in the industry is like French New Wave. It was a
Oh yeah.
rebellion against film being old school, historical, expensive, and disconnected from the youth. When you think about all of the techniques that were developed, because it was just
Yeah.
people grabbing cameras and getting out there. Like, how often do people use jump cut now? We wouldn't have ever had the jump cut if we had not
Yeah,
had
yeah.
a bunch of angry young French people being like, "Fuck it, we'll go and shoot in the streets." So like I think that there's a really exciting time because, as technology is also changing the techniques that we are using to execute film,
Yeah.
we're about to see an entire new vocabulary of cinema be
Yeah.
developed by new creatives. And it feels very similar to early hip hop,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that sense of different voices being able to come into the mix and the accessibility of technology, phones being in kids' hands, the abilities for
Mm.
people to just make stuff off their computers. We're seeing, to call it outsider art is incorrect because there's so much education available online that so many of these incredible people are self-taught. They're not outsider artists,
Mm.
but they're bringing such a freshness and such
Yeah.
like a rebellion against everything that Hollywood represents and the ways that it can exist in the world.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to start seeing like when I think about pop, the best way to describe it is like it's like a mixtape.
Mm.
It's like here's a group of artists that I'm like, you need to know about these guys, and here's a bunch of tracks they made. How cool! And I
Yeah.
think we're going to start seeing more of that, where it's about the talent. Another great film I haven't had a chance to see it, but I've heard nothing but good things is The Weed Eaters. And again, like a great collective of people that have just come together to make something really cool.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, as much as there's limitations breeds innovation, and I
Yeah.
think we are in that phase where people are finally going, oh, I'm sick of waiting in line. I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
gonna go do something. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
go do something. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
sick of seeing the same stuff happening again and again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I
Yes.
I do, like I always feel like, there's always like this kind of I guess like fund, like government funding kind of component as well that I
Mhm.
think about, like when we think about like, I mean, speaking of new wave, like the Australian new wave, or like, the Australian film renaissance or whatever, of like the
Mm.
70s to the 80s, which was like basically driven by the government bringing in a new scheme to help fund, like creatives and, young like filmmakers and stuff,
Mm.
and how literally every iconic Australian film, well, almost every one of that, like it's like Australian film was defined by this period, like everything from like the first two Mad Max movies, Picnic at Hanging Rock, like fucking like Wake and Fright, which is probably the most Australian film ever. I don't know if either of you have seen it. Even like Crocodile Dundee, and the like that's from that period of of the government just going like, oh, actually no, we are gonna actually help these young filmmakers and even like actors, cinematographers, and all this kind of stuff. We're gonna help support them into the industry and into jobs and stuff. Yeah, what's the current, I mean, I've been out of it for so long. What's the current kind of government funding situation like?
Well, I
I'm
just
guessing it's
want to add to
pretty,
this as well,
yeah.
because I was about to ask a similar question, but I wanted to also swing this question back around for you, Cassie, around near the beginning of the episode, you were talking about how there are multiple ecosystems. And the way the funding models work for that is different as well. And you're talking about the necessity now to not just work through shorts, but to get a feature. So, how does
Mm.
that play into the current funding opportunities as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the current administration at the Film Commission is doing really well is breaking down some of the barriers for sort of emerging. So if you're looking at some of the innovation pathways that they're introducing, the fact that they've turned development into rolling, the fact that they've introduced the fact that you have a meeting with them now before you put heaps of work into an application going in. So there's been some really smart choices, but they are all covering a really ugly truth, and that is because there's no money.
Yeah.
So, we are not getting these innovations because people suddenly really care about low budget filmmaking. We're getting these innovations because that is the only pathways left, and we need to make this little piece of butter go over the whole piece of bread.
Mm,
So the the biggest challenge as I see it is the fact that our industry is currently entirely government supported. And in order for us to shift away from that and for it not to be contingent on who is in government or who is not in government,
yeah.
we actually need to shift the burden away from government funding into private funding. And I've spent the last sort of probably since we last were on this on this podcast together trying to figure that out. And some of that is going, where is the money? How do you engage with it? How do you attract it into the industry? And so there's a couple of different ways. There's a lot of people who have looked into the venture capital or traditional investment space. But one of the areas that I'm really interested in is looking at nonprofit. So one of the big things that the business mentor of mine kind of woke me up to, because I was sitting there going, well, I keep pitching people business models that are absolutely going to work and they're doing positive things for marginalized voices. And he's like, yeah, but they don't care. They don't care if it works. They would, what they would rather get is tax relief. You know what's certain? Tax relief. So if you put together something where I can donate my money and I can see you do all the same work that you need to do, but I never ever have to rely on you making a profit for me to get something back for my money, now we're having a conversation. And it was just like the aha moment for me where I was like, of course.
Mm,
I'm doing charity work anyway, right? That is what development and trying to get marginalized voices supported and wanting that to exist outside of traditional pathways is, right?
mm,
And so if we're about to have a conversation with the growing wealthy class in New Zealand, and let's be honest, it is growing, with every wealthy American refugee that moves here, we are gaining a potential patron of the arts. And, it might seem like a really inelegant conversation, and I know a lot of people feel uncomfortable talking about money, but hey, maybe that's my role in the industry is to just not be uncomfortable talking about money. And that is, if you'd like to come here and you'd like to live here and you'd like to have a nice life living here, I would love for you to donate some money to the arts, please. And I would love for us to be able to give you that tax relief you so desire.
yeah.
It allows us to do good work and it allows us to, if you think about a non-profit funded project. So the main project that I've been working on kind of as an experimental version of this is the graphic novel adaptation of The Bone People, Carrie Hume's The Bone People.
Yeah, cool.
And this is a really interesting project because of the way that the Spiral Collectives work, who are the original publishers and who own the rights, but also who have promised Carrie that they will honor her wishes. And Carrie had a couple of key wishes. One that was no child was ever hurt in the adaptation of this work. So as the material deals with abuse, she was like, I do not want to have a live action adaptation of this work ever done. We need to wait for animation to catch up, and that way we can tell the story. I mean, God, she was just so ahead of her time. Anyway, Carrie Hume, what a legend. And so part of the challenge of that is to go, okay, well, how do we preserve the integrity of this work and never ever have to kowtow to investor pressure? And how can we have it that we can give this work away for free and still finance the work? And so it was a really interesting sort of way of trying to figure out, what is the sweet spot, budget wise, and how can you put together something that feels fair, but is also paying everybody? Because when you're not doing something for profit, people need to be paid fully upfront. There's no profit share. So if an artist is coming to work on the adaptation of a literary taonga, they need to be paid a fair rate for that. So much so that it also means that they'll get no profit. And so they're really interesting business models to have to figure out because you're trying to kind of, you're trying to go, hey, here is the ethical version. Here is the version where the work is respected, where the audience is respected, where the artist is respected. And because Spiral Collectives is now a charitable trust, we are in a position to go raise that money as nonprofit. When I think about the benefits of that, like The Bone People is very recognized work. So especially amongst people of a generation that have wealth. And so, it is a great opportunity to introduce myself to a lot of people who might be interested in supporting the arts. But I think the other key challenge about it is the success of The Bone People relied on the fact that Carrie Hume did not compromise. One of the big things that the Spiral Collectives, and as to why they were the original publishers, was because Kerry did not want to make any of the edits that the publishers wanted her to make. So, of course, this book goes on to win the Booker Prize because it is this inventive, original, incredible piece of writing, because it was allowed to be, because it was published by an organization that stood behind Kerry and her desire to not make any of those changes. And that is only possible when you are working in a collectives way, when you are working in a charitable way. Um, Anyway, I'm digressing. This project has been such a big part of my life for the last 18 months. And so it's just absorbed so much of my brain. But one of the things that came out of it for me was I was like, well, what are the other applications for this? If I'm about to go introduce myself to a huge number of people and talk with them about nonprofit funding as a means of supporting work within the arts, how do we bring that into the screen sector? How do we bring that into other elements? If we are going to shift people away from relying on the government, the solution should not be, yeah, but we've got to get into bed with shady money people who are trying to make a quick buck, right? There has to be another option. And for me, this other option is existing in this nonprofit space and going, okay, we've got a pathway by which we can accept money from rich people and we can deliver them something positive. They get tax relief and they get to feel really good about themselves. And in exchange, you could put together a development program where writers get to own their IP, regardless of the fact that that money was put down. It's all of those little things where you talk about, like, what is the impact of giving people free money, right? What is the impact of giving people free money to work on their body of work, to work on their craft? We talk about it when the artists' benefit used to exist. And you look at all of the local voices that came out of that. Like Taika Waititi
Yeah.
came out of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're sitting there going like, oh, how do we get more filmmakers like this? And it's like you cover their living costs so that they can focus on their work.
Back when we were doing the fortnightly stream, the old was it the PACE program, the old the artist benefit program through Wins, that literally came up every fucking episode, and either someone had personal experience with it or they had a friend that had been on it or something like that, and it had been this like amazing transformative period of their life. But and I also think about other times when different governments around the world have invested or somehow supported the creation of culture through these things. Like, there's I don't know if either of you have heard about Zamrock, the kind of Zambian rock movement that just came from
From you, Tim.
Oh right, yeah. Maybe we talked about it on stream. We might have, but yeah, the Zambian government was just like, okay, cool. We are going to I think they made it so a certain percentage of the music on the radio had to be local music, and they also gave it was like I think it was like a tax rebate to hospitality venues that had live musicians or artists playing.
That's so cool.
Things like that, and it just meant that being a musician became a viable career. Like you could just do that. There's other things like there's in Australia, I can't remember what state has it, but they've been talking about this thing for years, like this lazy place tax that they this concept over there of a lazy place is an untenanted building, like a landlord that is land banking or whatever, and they have these units that are empty or whatever. I can't remember which state it is in Australia that recently started a thing where the landlord can get a tax rebate for renting it to creative tenants, so like some kind of like creative business or even like a creative space, like an art space or something like that, which has meant that all of these completely empty, kind of like industrial spaces or whatever like that have just become, like filled with people that, like shared art spaces or little, like recording studio spaces, band practice spaces, all these kind of things just like popping up everywhere. And it's like, oh, wow, that's how you get people to do the thing. I guess you just have to make, like some kind of financial incentive them to do.
I think because New Zealand is so small, there is the opposite. There is the option for us to do this dual-pronged approach, right? Which is to engage with wealth in New Zealand and create those pathways, and then to lobby the government. And part of that is lobbying government to incentivize investment into the screen sector. There's a lot of things like that, which because people in the past have laundered money through the entertainment industry, that we have quite strict rules on that now, and that has meant that investment has slowed down significantly, or it is much, if there are fewer incentives and it is harder to invest than it would be for people overseas. Um, and so I think, being able to look at this issue and go, right, we need at a governmental level, there is some of it which is like shifting legislation to incentivize investment. There is shifting legislation to pay for wages, pay for change, all of those sorts of things. Um, but I am also really interested in pursuing and going, okay, but what does a privately funded PACE program look like? What is a donor-funded PACE program? If we don't tie it to the government, sorry, I'm going to be I'm just going to be radically Māori here for a second. We're never going to have free speech if that funding is coming from a Crown entity. We're never going to have true freedom of development, and we're never going to have a thriving Māori industry until we have pathways where that work can be free from the creative constraints that comes with it. But also just genuinely, we will always be caught in the ebb and flow of who is in government in the entertainment industry until we have our own pathways and our own money relationships. Chelsea Winstanley has been doing some absolutely amazing stuff in like alternative financing and ways of kind of moving projects. Like she was putting together, I believe it was the distribution for her most recent documentary. And they did an art auction, and they raised the money that way. And it was this really beautiful opportunity to bring people's awareness and elevated, sort of people's awareness of the project. But it also, in a really beautiful, elegant way, was like, hey, we have people within the community that can afford to put their hand in their pocket and they can afford to make sure that this beautiful taonga makes it overseas. So let's make that happen. And I think it just sets such a wonderful tone for what's possible because again it becomes like okay if we shift our mindset from going we need to talk to the government about this and go actually how do we build something that has so much influence then we consult with government because this is a small enough country if I take off all of my intersectional hats and I put on my if I was an old white man hat what would I do and what I would do is I would build something that is successful enough that I have influence and I believe that we can do that out of public, not out of public. I think we can do that out of non-profit donations. I believe that we can do that out of the wealthy class in this country paying their way and choosing to do it. At least I'm not asking you to invest in concrete toilets. I'm asking you to invest in the creative future of this nation.
We had this
you want to.
conversation previously as well, where the last even 50 years ago, you could the patronage model was viable. But it seems like we've got a lot of really uncultured rich people now who don't care, right? They're like, I don't want my name on a library, I film. No, I'm just going to watch Marvel as well. I don't even go to the films. So how much is this also about trying to build trust with what of wealth or what of these structures remains, and how do you start to do that? So obviously,
I'm going to say something borderline sexist here, and that is we talk to their wives.
Incredible.
Because, when you think about charitable spaces, when you think about charitable spaces and you think about, yeah, sure, there's a lot of tech money, there's a lot of that around, and those men may not be interested in it, but I guarantee you the women in their lives are. And so
I was just thinking about it because, like for investing in, say, like fine art, rich people love that because it's essentially a vehicle for capital. It's like, and it's a speculative market. Whereas, like obviously film isn't. You can't like, I mean, unless you get some good deal on like, like what you're gonna for your investment, what you're gonna get from the profits or anything like that. But you just, it's not the same thing where you can just buy something for cheap and then maybe one day it's worth fucking 100 times the amount or whatever like that.
It's an interesting thing. And how do you attach additional value? Like one of the business models that I was exploring last year was how is it that we use the Active Investor Plus scheme to attract investment? So if someone has to spend $5 million over a 5-year period, great, I can set you up a development company where I'll spend $5 million of your dollars for over a 5-year period and we'll return that money back to you. And so I think, part of it is about us. I think often in decolonized spaces, we're looking at the system and we go, how do we change the system? And some of it is us just like taking a massive step back and going, wait, one, do we still need the system? Are we packaging and working on something like the solution to fewer cars on the road isn't necessarily a bus. Sometimes it's putting accommodation near where people work, you know? And so if we're not having a really holistic look at where the issues are, we're going to keep doing triage work on the industry. You know, it's like constantly trying to put a band-aid on something. And, you know, the beauty about coming from a really small country is it's not that much money. You know, a couple of years ago, I was being such, excuse my language, I was being such a little cheeky cunt. I was working in VC spaces and angel investor spaces. And so I was, you know, around a lot of money men. And so we'd be talking about things and I'd be like, well, how much do you think it would cost to buy New Zealand? And how would you put that deal together? Because it's not that much money. You know, comparatively to what other people are doing, it isn't that much money. There's a
Yeah.
business deal being done right now that has more dollar value to it than what it would cost to buy the New Zealand screen industry and make it work properly, you know? And so kind of, yeah, challenging people, like money is just one way of making things happen, you know, and that's such an important thing for low budget filmmakers to remember as well. There's so many ways that you can get things done. You know, respect and reciprocity goes a really long way. And, you know, being able to be part of a community goes a really long way. And money is an absolutely necessary part of what we do because this is a very expensive art form. But changing your mentality and your relationship with money, you know, it's just one of the resources that we have. You know, it's just one of the ways that we can move in the world and engaging with people who have resources and convincing them to give you those resources to do good work. You know, as much as it sucks, there's an element of having to respect that that person has money and you want it, you
And
know?
you're making class traders out of people who don't realize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
100%. It's like, be involved in these cool projects and feel good about yourself and, you know, be able to tick the boxes and get your donor, fucking get your tax relief on it. But I think one of the other things is if if you're escaping from the United States and you're coming to this country, you should support our arts. Why? Because it is free speech. If you want to live in this country and you want to be free from all of the bullshit that's happening back in the United States, then you invest in ensuring that we have free media. You ensure that we have free and unbiased media. You
Yeah.
make sure that we have arts and we have culture, and you are not about to just replace us with an American way of life.
There should be something. I mean, I can imagine how they could do something where it was like, you know, the screen rebate we were talking about earlier, where it's like they can get 20 to 25% back. You know, it's like, well, maybe they only get 15% back, and 5 to 10% of that goes to you know, goes to a fund for domestic fucking talent development or something like that. You know, it's like I feel like a
It's as
serious
simple as,
government could figure
yeah,
that out.
it's as simple as putting a corridor. It's putting a financial corridor into your plan so that when the money comes back in, there's a profit share that is going towards future development and things like that. To speak to your guys' points, I think a big part of it is about if we want to be radical about how more things get made and how the distribution pathways work, part of that means us not being scared about money and not being scared to talk about money and not being scared to completely rethink how money engages with what we do. And part of that means kind of not talk, you know, we act like money's a really dirty word, and it can be, right? Money can be a very, very filthy thing, but it can also make a lot of really amazing things happen. And so if we're able to view it as a resource, if we're able to view it as a river that we want to utilize its power, then we've got to think about it that way. And that means not knocking at the government's door and going, hey, but we want more money for this. It's like, great, well, how do we take a step back and go, okay, there's other money in this country. Let's go find it. Let's figure out a way of making it align with our values and let's build something better.
And I think that point you made around once you build something better, it kind of forces these other structures to move as well. And I think we really can't understate what you're saying around the colonial structures, right? Of the government that we have here. And just what they'll be unwilling to fund. There's a level of independence and expression that just can't be viable under that colonial structure.
Absolutely. And I think not only is it holding back the authenticity of the voices, but it's actually holding back the commercial viability of the projects, you know, in an era where creative authenticity is of most importance to audiences. You know, if you want to make something that is going to connect with a global audience that's pushing for a decolonized perspective, they want real decolonized voices. You know, they don't want decolonization light as approved by the New Zealand Film Commission. Um, and so I think there is a really exciting time, especially when you think about this really awesome era. Like, as much as there is a lot of budget cutting happening towards the Māori industry at the moment, the artists that are coming up through and the work that is coming up through and the incredible projects that we're starting to see and the growth in the financial sector is a really exciting time to think about, well, 5 to 10 years from now, the Māori industry could exist up on its own 2 feet and influence how we fund things at a colonial level because it's thriving, So here's hoping the Ariki Group delivers on their promises and they and they make the studios work well and they create pathways for local people. But yeah, I think change is always scary, but change is opportunity as well. And we've been doing things the same way for a very long time. And so maybe it's time we tried some different things.
I think it's a pretty good place to cap it off. Any final thoughts or things that you want to put out there, Cathasaigh? Just around what you'd like to see people organizing for or pushing for, either within the industry or at a governmental level? Because I still think there are some things like, we're talking about workers' rights, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or et cetera, that, would also be great.
Yeah, I think, but like leading with what your strengths are, not everybody is a union person. Not everybody is a go join your union and volunteer. If you are someone that is good at the boring revolution and you're good at raising money and you're good at doing admin, find opportunities to do that. If you're somebody like myself who's comfortable to go lobby and get in people's faces, go do that. I think in this next phase, we need everybody and we need everybody playing to their strengths. And, we're all bringing different things to the table. But in order for us to have an industry that we deserve, we actually need to kind of take responsibility for it. And, come together as a community and go, great, well, and my bow and my sword and my axe, and together we shall,
You did it.
undertake this incredible
You
mission.
didn't do it.
So yeah, I think for people who are looking for a way to get involved, if you're good at raising money, great. Connect with artists who aren't. If you're good at mobilizing, if you're good at organizing, if you're good at put on events, there's a lot of different ways that people can be of service to the industry. And the number one thing I think is also at a really personal level, when you see exploitative behavior, say something. When someone that you're working with is being exposed to exploitative behavior or exploitative conditions, when someone's being harassed in the workplace, if you're seeing something that does not sit right with you, it does not matter if the people above you, it sits right with them. Say something, do something, because, ultimately activism's about showing up. And the easiest way for us to show up for each other in this industry is just to have each other's backs. Yeah.
Cool.
Final thing to leave the audience with. Thank you both for joining. Thanks for coming back to co-host, Tim. Wonderful to have you back on the audio.
Great to be back, Carl.
Thank you for guesting with us this evening, Cathasaigh. Where can people find you? Do you want to be found? Where can people find you online and reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can absolutely find me online. So my civilian Instagram is It's Me Cathasaigh on Insta. And if you could share out my alts as other bits and pieces, so I'm happy for people, my @Notorious account as well, for people who have a spicier inclination. And yeah, I think just keeping your eyes peeled. We've got some really cool stuff coming up for the release of Pop. One of the big things that we're leading with is trying to make more information about distribution accessible to filmmakers and kind of give people a bit of a crash course in how they could get their film out there. So yeah, @Pop the Film as well. There's nothing on that right now, but we're kicking off soon. But I can, in the short term, if you're looking for a really cool movie to watch, Hang Time is on TVNZ Plus. And that's a really great example of a New Zealand movie that got made for under $100,000, has made its money back, and is on TV.
Nice. And Tim, do people want to find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter mainly as Dread Conquest. I don't really post on Blue Sky, but I'm the same thing over there. Timothy's Tattoos on Instagram if you like tattoo stuff. Yeah. That's it.
And thank you to our audience as well. Obviously, we're going to be doing more of this sort of content over the next few months as we head into election season, while we're not doing weekly current events. So keep an ear out for your special interest, any of the areas that you want to get your teeth into. We'll hopefully have a range of different guests and expertise on the podcast. And if you'd like us to try and cover something in particular, flick me a message on Twitter, hit me up on Instagram or wherever you interact with me. And we'll try and get that done as well. We really want to be trying to put more content out there that is engaging directly with topics that people really want there'll be buzz about as we're looking for a change of government. So get in touch, like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you whenever the next episode is. Thank you again to my guests. We'll see you then.